Hello and welcome to Books and Beer. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you. I'm Luke, as you may or may not know, and I'm joined today. I'm very, very excited to be joined today by JT Patten. How you doing, dude?
I'm doing well, thanks. Appreciate you having me
Good.
on, Luke.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good to finally be able to share a beer with you. In fact, let's go straight into what we're
Yeah.
what we're drinking today.
Okay.
I'm on a Camden Pale. I'm in London at the moment, so this is one of the local beers from Camden. It's a place in North London. Yeah, I'm gonna crack that now. What are you? What's your
Well,
poison?
I'm in Chicago, so it's a little bit early. So I do have my coffee, but it's not too early for me. So I'm drinking.
Nice.
It's called Noon Whistle. In my area, it's a beer company in Naperville, and this is Gummy Apocalypse Northeast India Pale Ale. So
That
it's one of
sounds
my favorites.
that sounds really nice. I'm a big
Yeah.
fan of the Pale Ales. They're great. So yeah, cheers, man.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Cheers. Thanks.
joining us, and let us know in the comments, you guys at home, what you're drinking. Is it a beer? Is it coffee? Is it tea? Whatever. Let us know. So you're in Chicago, you say, JT?
I am, and this is really,
Mm.
really good. So I'm going to have another pull before we get going.
Yeah, absolutely.
I am in Chicago. Yes,
How long have you lived there? Has that been your forever?
it's yeah, it's been my forever. Now, I'm in the burbs of Chicago, the safest town in the U.S., as they call it.
Wow.
So I'm out in Naperville. But yeah, I love the city. I grew up in the south suburbs, and just always been kind of centered here, despite being all over wherever anybody's sending me and stuff like that.
Mm. So you've done a fair amount of travel with work and things in
I
the
have.
past, have you?
I
Mm.
have. It's slowed now. Now that I'm on the corporate side, it's even slowed a lot greater with COVID. But there were years when I'd be gone, 200 days or nights. So it was usually at least about 70-80% of the year I was gone for a better part of about 10, 12 years or so. So it's
Wow.
good to see the family again.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's intense on the kids and the wife and all that, isn't it? To be away for that length of time. Was that just within the US, or did you travel overseas as
Both,
well?
both. Yeah. So it could be overseas. It could be in country. Just whatever the requirement was.
Mm. Oh wow! And we're going to come back to talk about that job in a minute, 'cause I'm quite excited to do that. But let's talk about
Yeah.
your books first of all. So Sean Havens is one of your protagonists. That's one of the ones I'm reading. Where would you categorize them? What are they about? What sort of genre or subgenre do you think they sort of fall into?
Yeah, it's really kind of a bastard. It's it's and I'd say it's a little bit more of my background and interest, where it's espionage, but it's not like first of all, I would never put myself in those categories of the certain of the writers being great, but it's like Jean Le Carre, it's not going to be you know one of the slower burn type of espionage thrillers, but yet it is also not going to be a full blown door kicking military thriller. So it's kind of
Mm.
in between with what I would deem as reality,
Mm.
because it does blend the intel side that has to inform ops. And so I'm really kind of right in the middle. Again, based on my experience, it's more on the black ops side. It's not necessarily about SEALs, Delta, but you take it a level down. Some of these people can be ex SEALs, ex Delta, ex CIA, but it's usually working in this type of a gray matter. And my stories are often cast with a conspiracy element.
Mm-hmm.
As you and I were sharing a little bit at the beginning of this, conspiracies, you just never know. And so
Yeah.
if so you can have a lot of fun with something that's historic fiction, but because people don't really know, um, you can have a lot of fun with it. So I've done work with the Freemasons, Skull and Bones, and some of those conspiracies of the U.S. I did in Presidential Retreat, which is kind of a presidential assassination type book. I did a spin on the duel between Alexander Hamilton and Hamilton's involvement in Bank of New York and how things are going. So it's again,
Mm.
I try not to bore anybody with a lot of history, but I just make that kind of the setting or a backdrop to it to say, wait a second, did the U.S. really? Oh, I got to be careful because I'm dealing with with Londoner here. But did we really win independence, or are we beholden uh, to London and still for war reparations and things of that nature? Meaning, are we still um, are we still owned by someone else, and are we really free? And so those type of
Yeah,
conspiracies,
interesting
it's kind
ideas.
of fun to play with, and then just toss in a little history.
I like that, and I think what you've said there is really important. Is that you've got to sort of sprinkle that, haven't you? Because ultimately, the story is about the characters, the main character and the protagonist, the antagonist, whatever. But you sort of use that as your texture, don't you? The background or the conflict or whatever the bigger conflict is. But really, it's about one man trying to do one thing and survive and see his family again or whatever it might be.
That's right. And I think you really hit on something great, and something that I'm still learning is to put history and to put detail as texture, but not the basis of the book. When I started off with my first book, Shadow Masters, which is now being re-released, I think I was trying to prove to the readers that I knew more that they did, and I knew more than any other author that was writing anything about Black Ops. So I put all the jargon in there, and I put all of the acronyms in there and all that. So really, less than 1% of the US would have really known what the hell I was talking about. And so I don't think I think I did a disservice in that manner, because people would read it and they're like, I have no idea what this even means. My wife tried to read it. She's like, I don't know what this stuff is. She's like, so I'm sorry, I just can't get through it. And so I think that it affected the readability. And when I started off writing, it was because I wanted to kind of prove that, I guess egotistically, maybe just even being immature, I was thinking, I want to be better than everybody else because I know more. I know more about this subject matter. And so I try to put it out there, and I realized that, some of the great writers out there that don't have backgrounds like I did, ultimately they're still better writers. So they could sprinkle it in and give that backdrop, which I thought that I would just kind of throw up on everybody and I'd be better. Once I took a step back and realized, you know what, shit, I got to be a better writer actually, and then just use this as some of that texture, as you say.
That's a really good point. The way you've said that, and the master of this, Dan Brown, the way he
Yeah.
manages completely different books to yours, but the way he manages to make to tell the reader something, to teach the reader something without preaching to them. The way
That's right.
Langdon just says, the way Langdon just walks past a painting and just has this inner monologue about the story behind this painting. It's really well sort of sewn together, isn't it? And it's a real art form. I don't think I've nailed that yet, and it's a real art form if you can get there.
It really is, and I think even of it's funny because I use a pen name, and I've got real personal aspects of my family names and stuff in this built out. But ultimately, because of the intelligence community, I was thinking of snuggling, which is how to get close to something without being. And so in my case, by using the word Patten, I knew I would be on the shelves right next to James Patterson.
Oh, clever. Yeah.
But if you compare the two writers, and even if we're in somewhat similar subject, James Patterson, one of the art forms that he's mastered is somewhat of a simplicity in dialogue, in descriptions. He keeps it very fast and easy reading because he knows that the tension is hard to maintain. And so if he keeps it very fluid, it's great. And so I was thinking that here I thought I was smart getting so close to him. I actually also did myself a disservice because I couldn't be more different because of the ultra complexity that I have, the multi layers that I've got and things. And his, can be somewhat linear and simplistic, but telling a great story in how he does it. And so, again, it's like black and white in some cases between us because, it's stuff that he knew, he's learned and mastered, and it's stuff that I'm trying to figure out. And again, I'll be running behind him, for years to come.
No, you're the books. The part of the book that I've read has got that pace, and there is texture and depth in the characters and all those sorts of things. So it's building up pace now. I'm about 25% through, something like that. But yeah, So tell me about your sort of experience in that world, because you say you're writing there from knowing all of this. This is
Yeah.
your job in the, would you call it, in the intelligence community, or in the intelligence field, or law enforcement, or what?
Yeah.
Where would you?
So a little bit of both.
Mm,
So I've instructed on the intelligence or on the law enforcement side, whether it's police departments, FBI, they're analysts, and then also in support of missions and with the intelligence community. So I will say that I've worked with three of the bigs in the intelligence community in the U.S. And then also on the special operations side and special mission side in support of their mission. I'm not a shooter, so I don't deploy and go out. I'm not, hero bound. I'm just one of the geeks in the tanks that's telling them, what I see more strategic intelligence, some in support of tactical or mission work,
mm,
and some targeting in the past, but by and large, it's more, sitting within the comforts of a environment that I've, located in, as opposed to, being in the deep and dirty, of the field. But what I'm enabling or had enabled was those people who are doing it, how to get
yeah.
in, how to get out, how to pay people, how to track down folks, and in some cases we would nudge that to show them who they need to target, why they need to target people, so that any kinetic response is going to have a greater effect on something strategically. So that's kind of where it is.
So would you be working would you be working close to the action? Because so you're going to have to dumb this down, I think,
Yeah.
in sense of me
Yeah.
to understand. In the films, right? There's the hero, and he's out doing the thing, and there's always this guy. He's got the hero's got like an earpiece on, and there's always this guy sat in the back of a truck around the corner with loads of screens, watching it all on a drone, listening to the various devices they've got in the person's flat. They're listening to them scheming, and the person, is that you at that? Are you that guy on the keys? Sort of telling them, oh, heat signatures 200 yards ahead. All of that sort of thing.
No, I'm the guy that's the cutting room floor where they're like, yeah,
Right.
skip past this. It's too slow. Probably,
Yeah. Okay.
probably
So
the
you
best.
wouldn't even be in Mission Impossible.
They wouldn't even
Yeah.
have me in Mission Impossible. I think the best depiction that I've ever seen. There's two of them. Um, Spy Games with Robert Redford and Brad Pitt. One of my favorite movies. I would say that I'm very much one of those guys that was seated on the table,
Mhm.
back in like Langley, um, talking about how something might have needed to have been shaped, this or that, and the actual guy on the ground is the one who's coming in there and having to defend himself. I'd say that I was probably more to the point where I was supporting that guy on the ground, either with personas, platforms, etc. I'd say the other good one to reference would be if you've ever seen the movie Traitor with
No, don't think so.
Don Cheadle and I can't remember the other guy's name. He was in Dumb and Dumber. But anyway, there's a point where this guy is running an asset, and so this guy is in the thick of this shit. Don Cheadle is out in like Africa, and he's an asset, and he's calling, and he's trying to get out of certain things. And there's this guy in Washington who's like bringing in groceries from his car. He's like at his kid's soccer game, and he's like, hang on a second. And so this guy's like, dude, what do I need to do? And he's like, I'll get on that. But yet you're running an asset from someplace else, and you know what
Right.
you need him to do, but he's kind of expendable to you. And I'd say that I probably fell into more of that soccer dad type of a role of informing these guys where, if you're having to put it in cinema. But for the most part, I
Yeah.
was in, DC, was in the Bragg area, was in Tampa, and then some overseas where it's likely informing people of the tasks or the concepts of operations that have to be done. If there is some shit that gets involved and somebody has to bug out or do something, how to look at some of the routes, what to disrupt, where to go, and things like that, and understanding kind of the culture, the people, and then sometimes, deeper back of wrecking something in a company like an election or a social movement or something, figuring that out and kind of manipulating the people or the messages.
I get you. Okay, no, that's really interesting, but it must have given you a fascinating insight, to that sort of world, seeing how all the pieces fit together. And you must also have felt like, as I suppose anyone who works in that sort of field does, you're just one tiny part of a giant machine of different things that happen, all over the world, really.
Yeah, for sure. I'd say the only difference in that was that for a lot of the tasks, based on who is involved with it, you'd have maybe less than 50 people who even knew about it. And so that was kind of the interesting thing. And I think it's also kind of the challenge where if you're looking for a sense of community, how you fit in, that's a difficult one, because in that realm of military and intelligence community, you have a certain sense of belonging. And when you get into a little bit more of that gray and the black area, because you can't share what you're doing and with whom and stuff, and even acknowledge some people that you're working with, it could be a little bit lonely, and it can be a little bit. You know what you're doing, and it's the right thing for the mission and for the greater cause of what you're trying to affect or shape. But again, if you're looking for that, the pats on the back, the medals, and acknowledgement, telling people what you do because it's so cool and interesting, what have you. You don't get any of that, and I think that from one sense, I felt a little bit longing for some, especially from the standpoint as like any kid that ever got into or that had dreams of this type of stuff, to work with tier 1 groups, to work with the intelligence agencies, etc., and have literally your dream jobs come true, but then not be able to say anything about it, kind of sucks.
Yeah, but this is something that filmmakers and writers play on, isn't it? You have these agents who supposedly work at an insurance company, on the 5th floor of some suburban tower block or whatever, and even their partner doesn't know what they do. Well, I mean, obviously, you weren't to that level. Your partner knew what you did, but just you weren't able to say, yes, we had a great win today, or we did this and it was brilliant. You just have to say, have I understood that right?
No, not always. I've blended both the public and private sector, and in some cases I was in the private sector working for the public sector because it gave me placement and access. So there are certain global entities that I was a part of where some people thought I was doing one thing, other people knew I was doing something else. Very few of them knew what I was actually doing, which was, ethically or legally, we were accessing some files that they had of global customers and things like that they didn't know we had access to or could get access to, but we would use it to our advantage, so it helped having somebody on the inside. And in those cases, again, it's pretty much, that water cooler chat or somebody inviting you to go grab a beer or something like that is like, hey, how was this week? There was one point I was technically a recruiter. And I think that if anybody ever looked to see if I had ever recruited anybody into that company, they would find that I recruited absolutely zero.
Okay, so it said you were a recruiter,
something like that.
the worst recruiter in the history of recruitment, because you were really doing something else. You weren't actually.
Yeah, and it made it awkward sometimes because now corporations, especially if you think back 10 years, I don't think HR had as much of a play into performance reviews, ensuring that everybody kumbaya, you're part, this group, you see this manager all the time, they pat you on the head and tell you they love you and all that stuff. So back then it was easier to just kind of hide. And so I actually remember at one point being at risk of a layoff because nobody knew who I was or what I was doing. And I'm like, you guys can't be doing this. Because they're saying, well, you're not part of these meetings. You don't come to this. You don't come to that. And I'm like, I'm not supposed to. And they're like, but everybody has to in this group. I'm like, no, I don't think you understand. But then somebody put out in HR, this is what everybody has to do from a human capital perspective in this group. And I'm thinking, and this kind of came back to later on when I was even in building personas and doing cover stories and things like that. I'm like, if you put them into a company as a non-official cover, you got to realize not only are you dealing with social media, you're dealing with human resources, you're dealing with peers, you're dealing with all of this corporate bullshit that has to unite everybody, put on your profile what you're doing, get them on Yammer and all this stuff. I'm like, you're going to blow somebody's cover because they're like, dude, what do you do? Because they have to go to these other meetings and share, hi, my name is Bob and I work in, this group and I do this and so great to meet you and look me up on LinkedIn. So it has gotten so complex that honestly, about the time that I was getting out, as disappointed as I was, it was probably a godsend because I have no idea how I would have dealt with identity management in a global sphere of just seamlessness, really.
So is it the sense that the colleagues? So for example, a new person will start at this company, and this person's got an office in the building, and they go to there to do their work, and the colleagues that work in the office as well are obviously actual employees of that company, but that other person might be there to do something completely different. They say it's a company of lawyers or accountants. Yep. They're not there to be a lawyer or an accountant. They're doing some other thing in that office which no one knows, but everyone else assumes that's what they're doing, but they're not. Do you know what I mean?
And I'd say that again, I was back in early 2000, and so you didn't have, not as, I mean, yes, we had everything digitized, but it wasn't to the same extent. It was like you had to go to SharePoint, even if it was SharePoint, to find a PDF of an org chart, and maybe somebody was or was not on it, but you didn't have it where you go to like, an application like Workday and you click on a manager and you see what everybody does and who they are and what their level is and all that stuff. Back then, you could tuck people away. And so that's how the intelligence community, in some cases with non-official cover, had worked on for years, because you just tuck somebody away and they don't know because there's no way anybody brings it up. Excuse me. Now you've got a lot more transparency into an organization, and I think that it's got to make things much more difficult. And I suspect even at the time that I was kind of transitioning out, we were still talking about the fact that non-official cover under corporations is going to have to go away to a large degree, and somebody is going to have to be operating in true name, true business, and what it's doing is a little bit more like the Chinese approach to intelligence gathering, where if you're sending out JT Patten to a trade show in France, his real name is JT Patten, and he really is working for a company like an IBM or an Oracle or something like that, and he really does have that type of a background. But the difference is, you may have a handler that's tasking him while he's there and saying, can you gather certain bits of information, pass it over to us? It's kind of like the domestic programs, and then you just kind of go about your way. And so it's more from a volume of nuggets that you're bringing in and indicators that is creating that bigger picture. So it's creating a swarm of information that you're using, and then you're aggregating it down to create your intelligence picture, versus just one guy who's being sent out and he's, going around to all those parties, shaking hands, patting people on the back and collecting.
So the idea of James Bond going to Munich and being a jewels dealer, and then going to Berlin and being an arms dealer or a poker player, and then going to Monte Carlo and being a car salesman, is just not a thing that would happen.
That's right. That's right. I mean, I've got team members in my commercial work. I'm in cybersecurity nowadays. I've got less experienced younger team members in their 20s when they're meeting somebody and like, oh, dude, can I get your Snap? And they're talking about, can they get their Snapchat profile so they can put that on there? And then they're looking on Instagram, is that their the Finstagram, the fake Instagram, or is it their real? And so they're already automatically connected. They know everybody about these people, and then the connections that are mutual. And so if you get that one guy, like I get on Facebook sometimes, someone's like, looking to friend me. If I see that they know one person mutually and they don't have much in their background, I'm like, dude, that's probably some like, some spoof thing going on, and so I just delete it. So you've got no creds that way. So it's got to be a bitch right now.
It's got to be hard, right? Well, this conversation is absolutely fascinating. I hope the people in the comments don't mind that we've ignored them because we're talking. Alison's in. She says hello, Alison.
Hello, Allison.
Steve has joined us as well. Steve's an author.
Steve.
All right, lads. The Hamilton story is amazing. Alison says it sounds fascinating. It is fascinating, and Fiona is joining us as well. If people listening at home, if you've got any questions that you'd like JT to answer, pop them in the comments. I've told him before the show, if he doesn't want to answer anything, that's fine too. If he wants to tell us to butt out, or
No.
I said I don't want him to have to live in an embassy overseas for the rest of his days, because he's got
All good.
some men in a black windowed 4x4s.
All good.
Yeah.
And Steve, if he's the Hamilton fan, that book is Presidential Retreat. You don't necessarily have to read them all in order, but it's in the prologue and the epilogue. And if you liked Hamilton the musical, you might enjoy how those two things came in between Hamilton and Burr for the actual meetings and final duel. So it was about the time that I was writing that my kids were dragging me to Hamilton. So big fan too.
Oh, fantastic! So your books are all based, or they all start in the US, don't they? That's sort of the intelligence community in which they start, but they go all over the place as well. You've got one that travels to Southeast Asia, haven't you?
Yeah. So I do. I guess I do follow a bit of a formula, trying to be a little bit cinematic too. If you've got that first, while people are walking into the theater, the first big bang, what's going on and stuff, and it usually starts
shots,
out there, right? and then you kind of pull back and hear what's the story, and okay, your task, now that we've established that you're a badass, we're sending you to wherever, and you're going to bitch about it, but you're going to go anyway, and next thing you know you're riding on an elephant. So yeah, I'd say the first book I've got, Shadow Masters, actually that one is focused almost entirely in the U.S. and being a true Chicagoan, most of my books do have a Chicago element to it. I've got a lot of settings in the city. So even again, kind of, hey, big surprise. So the guy that's going back and forth to DC and all that lives in Chicago, and so does my protagonist. So no ego there. But yeah, I do have it global in nature. So we're going to Southeast Asia, hitting Thailand, Burma, and I think in the Presidential Retreat, that's actually in Martha's Vineyard, where a lot of presidents have gone. So play on words there. The Task Force Orange series that I have that focuses on a highly secretive special mission unit, intelligence support activity. That one I think starts off in. Where the hell does it start off? It starts off in Lebanon, and then ends up going back to the U.S., and then it has some elements of Iran, and then I think the one after that also kind of a Chicago thing. So if people are kind of sick of seeing, Washington, D.C., and people going to Russia all the time or to China, again, I just try to mix it up. I think there's even an element of just getting into like the really kind of less privileged areas of Chicago in some of the crime-ridden areas with a lot of gang violence and how they kind of exploit some of those things too.
Yeah, I'm thinking with my series, because all of mine go to different cities, and the most recent one went to New York, and I've then Riga is coming up, which is in Latvia, and then I think I'll do Istanbul after that, and then I'm thinking as the following one I need to come back to the States or Canada. I'm thinking somewhere in North America.
Cool.
And I'm wondering what city, because they're missing people stories, so I'm wondering what city sort of lends itself to that sort of vibe. Maybe a place like Chicago, Detroit, or even somewhere in the deep south. I was thinking. I haven't decided, but anyway.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I mean, Turkey is so rich, and these days, even without being able to travel to certain places, I mean, YouTube is so amazing to just give you that visual and that vibe of things. So that's cool. Look forward to seeing those.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Yeah. Let's have a quick look over the comments. Allison's asked, what does JT stand for? Are you able to say? Are you allowed to say?
So we named all of our kids. Their middle names have family names to it. So I took my oldest daughter's middle name initial, my middle daughter's initial, and then my son's middle name, which is also my mother's maiden name. I shouldn't have said that because they always ask that on security questions. What's your mom's maiden name? So I just kind of fucked myself. But thanks.
Oh
I'll have
no!
to
Oh
just
no!
change my
Right, forget
password.
it.
Damn you, Allison!
It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Steve says New Orleans is a good setting.
Awesome place.
Yeah, yeah. Alison suggests Miami. Yes, Miami Vice. I'm thinking of when she says that. You know. Andrew says, "Cheers, Luke and JT. I'm definitely going to be looking into JT's thrillers. Your real life experiences have me intrigued in your writing for sure." Yes, I think.
Cool.
I agree with that definitely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, your protagonists then. You've gone down the in the book I'm reading. You've gone down the vibe of the guy who's a little bit older than he's not one of the young things. You know, he almost feels like, and I think this is quite a nice trait that a lot of writers go for. He almost feels like that. He's a bit of the old school. You know, the younger people are sort of passing him by. It must be in that field because of how quickly things move, how intense the job is, you know, how fit and healthy you have to be to sort of complete the job. Certainly if you're out doing that, that must be quite a common thing in sort of the intelligence community. That turnover must be quite, you know, ferocious.
And I think with the intelligence community more than the special mission units, by the very nature of what they're doing, unless you're getting into some more of the operational elements of, say, CIA that are outsourced with SAD, there isn't a lot of time. I mean, I guess you could always find time, but you'll find less buff guys in the intelligence community. They get a little bit squishy and soft, maybe go down to the gym for a little bit. But the very nature of how in many cultures you collect intelligence is by being part of that social fabric. That means usually you're eating, you're drinking, you're just hanging out. And so you're not going to have somebody who's just this really cut individual. And many times that's part of the persona also that you're trying to avoid being affiliated with, is looking like your former military and stuff. So I think that, you're right. And Sean embodies that guy who's been away too long. He's got the family going on. He's missed the birthdays. He's missed the proms. He's missed, you know, this and that. He's, you know, trying to make up for it because he kind of does okay. You know, his heart is in that right place. He's not a guy. He's a guy that loves that adrenaline, but he loves his family. So he's really torn. He's not a guy that has come in there and said, look, I am a Marine first and everything else comes beyond it. I'm a SEAL first. And you guys know that my dedication is here. If it's Christmas morning, I'm going to be there. Sean is the guy that's like, look, I know how this works. I'm probably going to be flying out. I'm going to be sitting on the tarmac for a few hours. I know the game. You're probably not going to have me deploying for another couple of days. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to do Christmas with the family. I'll call you back in another day or so, and then I'll get out there, which pisses the living shit out of everybody else who's sitting out there missing their family. But that's the guy knows the game. And that's just exactly it. And I think that comes also to, I'm not too over the top in my messages, but one of the things that I always realized, and one that stopped me from going into the military full on, was the fact that a lot of the orders that you receive are because somebody thought that that was the right thing to do at the time, didn't always think about other things. Just like, I'm just going to throw it out there because I know everybody's got to go and follow it. Sean's the type of guy who's like, wait a second, why do we have to do that?
You know,
and that pisses them off. I mean, it's I was in Army ROTC, and I was a complete disaster because I would always question what we were doing, even in field training exercises. I'm like, that's kind of stupid. Why would we do that? And they're like, well, because it's got to help these guys. I'm like, no, but that's not how it would really be. I'm like, just shut up and do it. And there's a certain element that you have to do it to be really effective in those type of environments. But it does take a certain type of a person. And I think that a person that questions a lot of those things does not, always fit in well. Person that doesn't question sometimes we're seeing those problems as we are with the SEALs and even Delta in some cases, of some of the social factors afterwards, where because you've got people that were so literally just following orders, they often didn't take a step back and say, is this really the right thing to do? I'm not dogging, the military components. I'm just saying some elements within that, because of the very nature of what they have to do and how they have to execute, it does leave a residual risk there that, that's a problem.
And something that's interesting that you said there is actually the real tension in the story, and this is quite common, I think, in the sort of stories you write, and in a way in the stories that I write. In the real tension is there's a guy who's missing his family and he wants to be back. He wants to be there for the graduation or the prom or whatever, and he's really trying to get this thing done to get back to that thing. It doesn't matter whether that thing is, is something in an office block or just like a normal job, or whether it's stopping a bomb on the other side of the world. It just so happens that that's his job, but really he's a dad, isn't he? He's a father trying to do right for his kids. And I think that gives the sort of stories that you write a sort of universal appeal, because everyone has had a father, or will be a father, or has had some kind of father figure, knows what that family connection is like, and has that sort of emotive response. It makes it very, very down to earth, I think.
And I hope readers pick up on that. I mean, I think that I look back and I remember, I think it's a perfect parallel. Is there was a time that I stayed up for almost 2 days because I was told I had to think about how I would get somebody into a certain country and then into another, how to make it believable. And I just racked my brain on it, committed, because I'm thinking there's an individual here who maybe wants to get back to their family also. Not necessarily the next weekend, but you have a responsibility to not to burn that person. So I gave it everything that I absolutely had. A week later, I was in a situation, still in that same place where I was on the East Coast. My flight was canceled. And as I was going home, and I had told my son, yes, I'm going to be home. I'm going to drive you to school the next morning, and I will be there. I was crestfallen when that flight was canceled, and I didn't care what it cost. I went and I got a rental car and I drove straight back to Chicago that night, from 8 o'clock on, and I arrived probably 10 minutes before he was ready to go to school. And I'm just, just dying. But it's the same thing. It's just, I'm going to have as much commitment to the operation, the mission, as I am to my family. And I think a lot of other people might have just said, hey, you know what, guys, this is part of my job. It's not going to work. But that's also why I didn't always work in some of those situations, and was probably a real pain in the ass, just like my character, Sean Havens. I know I was.
Oh, amazing. Alison's got a good question. She says, did you have to wait until you left the job before you could start writing?
Yeah, good question, Allison. So the reason that I actually ended up first using a pseudonym and self-publishing Shadow Masters was because that I was still working. And so I knew what the requirements were, and I knew what I had to adhere to. I had to submit to the CIA pre-publication board. I had to write to and submit to the Department of Defense. And so I did that. But I also knew there were some guys that had been former Delta that about the same time I was going to push my book out, they didn't do it. And I think in both of those cases, they were informed by their agent and the publisher that, hey, it's not something that you have to do. We'll figure it out. It'll be okay. In my case, I saw what had happened, so I wanted to make sure that I did it. So that was the reason that I kind of kept control of the first couple books while I was doing things. And then when I saw, all right, it's okay, I know how to do this, that's when I then went the publishing route. But I still think it was the right thing to do. It took a little bit longer. It's also why I'm not writing as many of those books right now, because they didn't like the topics that I was writing about, and it kept getting a little bit more arduous. So I'm letting things just cool down a little bit.
So you had to send a copy of the manuscript to the Ministry of Defense, essentially, and they would read it and approve it.
Yeah. So anything within the intelligence community. So for me, I had to submit to the CIA pre-publication board. If they needed something to go to NSA, they would facilitate that. Then I would have to send to DOD on my own. The way that the intelligence community works is before anybody else sees what you're writing, you have to send to them first. DoD is different. You have to send to them before you publish it. So after it's been edited, after everything else, they want to make sure that before it's released. I kind of got blocked in the end by DoD saying, because I was writing more about a specific, unit, in this case, Task Force Orange, and because of my involvement in supporting JSOC, they wanted to take the lead. So how do you get your information in if they're taking the lead, but they only want to see the final? But the agency wants to see the first copies before it goes anywhere. So essentially, you can't do it without getting blocked up.
Stuck in the middle, yeah.
That's exactly right.
Do they give you a list of changes then? Have they said, or do they just say no, don't?
No. They're actually pretty good about it. So, well, there's two ways of doing it. One, they just drag it out forever, and so you're just like, what's going on? I just can't do this. And so many people just go ahead and publish it, and then kind of figure it out and see what happens. Get an attorney. Yeah. In most cases, the things that I got were redactions. And so it's just like you would see in anything you kind of Google up or something. It's just got that black line against words. And then, so in my case, they'd write you a letter and it would say, all right, page 53, we think that we would like you to remove this word, and this word. And then they show you then what they've blacked out. And they say, if you've got any questions, you could submit to, it's not like argue, but it's basically you want to contest it,
like an appeal. Yeah.
And so you can, that's probably the exact word, and so you do have to do it, but then there's that longer process. So in the meantime, you've got a publisher saying, we're supposed to get this out here now, and it's been 6 months, 9 months, and when are we going to do this? So you don't want to I didn't want to shortcut the process. I really did want to be upfront, honest, and make sure that if there was something that I put in that was going to be a problem, that it was covered. But so in most cases, I just went ahead and changed the words that they wanted me to use, or the locations, or like there's a Snowden book, and it talks about what a couple of these actual systems were. And so if it said the first part of it was like key, I may have written in my book lock. So I'll change the word so that it kind of gets the right thing across. But, so maybe insiders know it. Outsiders wouldn't know the difference. So it's like, kind of, why am I screwing around anyway? Because I could have just called it like, dog food, and nobody would have known the difference. And I think that's, again...
Were you trying to be close so that someone in the community would read it and be like, oh, I know what he's talking about? It's like, there's like a hidden subtext.
It is, because I think there's a certain point where a lot of people that have been in the community, they like authors, but they're like, it wasn't believable.
Yeah. Like,
so
Jack Bauer couldn't do that. That's impossible, or whatever.
So I think I did want to do it, but again, I think it probably comes back to ego too, is what I talked about, is community and being part of that fabric, where if I can't say, hey, I was working for this group or that element or whatever, by putting that in there, I think it gave me internal validation, like somebody out there knows what I did and where I was. And so again, it's probably like a low self-esteem, ego-driven thing. If you want to, Freud me, put me on the couch. But I think I did want to give some of that authenticity to whom I could, without just putting it out there and saying, who cares? I'm just going to do it because you guys aren't going to sue me anyway, So tongue in cheek.
I understand that. No, it makes sense. Do you think there was an element of your wanting to write these books that was because you weren't allowed to talk about these things for so long? So this was like your... Yeah, maybe this is too therapeutic. This is your out. This is your saying, right, this is what I've been doing all this time,
I'm sure that there was some of it, because I left the community under a very inauspicious way, which is I did get caught up where they cut the contract because we were using fronts and contracts within other military commands and projects. So when they cut that, we were just done. And it was like, turn in laptops, turn in this and that because there's no funding.
Mm.
And so it was kind of like, all right, we're not paying for the hotels. We're not doing this. If you want to move, be here. We're not paying for your travel. You can relocate here and we'll get you in a week. But, I had a bigger family decision to make than just, I love my job.
Mm.
So I think in those cases, it was just kind of like I had to step back, walk away, say goodbye. People were like, for about 6 months scrambling, let's transfer, clearances and contracts and bring you back under, legitimate purposes, yada, yada. And it was like, I kind of looked back and I was like, where's the value of it? And I saw how people had responded in some cases. I'm like, you don't even give a shit. You kind of felt like you didn't even matter if you were just down to a contract. And so I think when I left, I was definitely disgruntled. I definitely felt like, you think you're going to replace me with somebody that has no idea about what X, Y, or Z was and how we did it, because I had seen those people that I had replaced that sucked. And so I was definitely pissed off. But what I wrote was not vindictive. It was because at the time, a buddy and I were helping out this other kind of name brand author, and we were giving them information, and he bet me, he's like, we should write this stuff because we'd do better. And as I shared earlier, I figured out with all of what I know, I could put it in. So that's when I started it. And then I think it was a little bit cathartic for me because I felt like I was still kind of attached to it, and I was still doing it, and I was still kind of in. And so that lasted me for a good 5 books over a course of 7, 8 years. And now I'm at peace with everything. I'm happy being away from it. I'm happy not looking over the shoulder. I'm happy not blacking out pictures of my kids and stuff that I post on social media. I'm like, I'm okay with being purely commercial right now. And that's where I've thought, even, based on some other factors, I'm even okay just trying some other genres to write in to grow as an author.
So tell us about that. What are you writing at the moment? What are you working on for your next books?
So as I mentioned initially, I had pre-published, I had self-published the first 3 in my series of the Sean Havens Black Ops. Those have been acquired by Force Poseidon, the publisher. So we're republishing those, and so we're redoing the editing in it. We're cutting out some of the stuff that just was a little bit too heavy, a little bit too fluffy, and the acronym made it confusing. Tightening it up, and then adding in some Easter eggs that kind of flowed to the next stories. In the meantime, I've been playing. My kids have been always asking me, "Can you write something that we can read?" Well, I mean, it's taken me so long now. They're pretty much to the ages where they could read it anyway. But I told my son that I would write a story for him that was kind of scary. So I started writing into this supernatural horror side, and it's Whispers of a Stranger that I'm writing right now. I hope to get that finished in about a year. It's just taken forever with COVID. I just had other priorities, didn't feel like writing as much, and then
that's happened to us all,
right. So I think I'll do a couple more of those because I did get the overtones, as I shared, that DoD and the IC weren't really happy with what I was writing, because as you get into some of the SIGINT and more technical things, they do want to keep those a little bit closer to the vest. So I'll let those cool down and try my hand at some other genres, and hopefully when I come back to Task Force Orange series and finish off Sean and Drake and that storyline, maybe even I'll have matured also as a better writer.
Do you think you'd write anything historical? Because I would love to write a Cold War thriller. I think that would be a fantastic period to write in, with the the USSR or the Soviet Union and the US and all of the, all that sort of twisted, dark stuff that went on in that period of time.
So maybe. So author Josh Hood and I are close friends, and he's a fantastic writer. He's taken over some of the Ludlum things, taking over the Treadstone next phase. And wow. Josh and I had talked about doing something like, as from the perspective of an intelligence operator in the 80s, where you're back to no cell phones, pay phones, and things like that.
Yeah.
We thought that
Yeah.
that could be kind of fun, but he's got his projects, I've got some of my projects. So I know that we keep talking about it, and we're looking to do, could we do a collaborative piece? So that may merge, but aside from that, it's just, I kind of like doing things a little bit more freer, a little bit more whimsical. Nobody's going to say what caliber was that, and that's not going to come out at that speed and at that distance. Like, who gives a shit?
That's true, isn't it? That is the problem with doing anything historical, is the research involved would be crazy. And I suppose with the current stuff, who's to say what technology? I mean, you probably know, but who's to say what technology is going on behind closed doors? With drones and satellite images and all this sort of thing. You could make that up in a book, and
Yeah,
no one could say, "Oh, that wouldn't happen," because actually, no one really knows what could be possible and what couldn't be possible.
It is exactly right. And I get a lot of thriller writers that reach out to me, and they'll say, "Hey, how would you do this or this?" And I'm like, "Dude, bullshit it,"
Yeah.
because who's gonna know? So the more complex that you make it, somebody's going to scrutinize it. But if you just kind of put it into the realm of the possible, I mean, I can't think of how many weird, wacky ideas that we just threw against the wall, and we end up picking, one of them out of 12 that would have been equally as stupid. But that's just how we would have done it. So in those cases, just make it sound believable. Again, going back to what you said, make it more of that texture of the story, but not the focus of the story, and keep the emotion going, keep that tension going, the pacing. That's so much more important than the actual details of what system it is, what weapon it is, and how you actually moved money or did whatever. I mean, it's like, you got one dork that's going to be out there looking it up and telling you, you're an asshole. I'm going to put you, write you up a bad Amazon review for it and stuff. And it's like, in the meantime, people are like writing like, oh, that was so awesome that you just wrote it because it seemed so believable, whatever.
That's it, isn't it? But as we've said, ultimately the story is about an emotion, a human doing something right or trying to do the right thing, and all the other stuff is just on there. It's just at the top. Oh, I absolutely love this conversation. Alison's asked what we're drinking. I have almost finished drinking my second Camden Pale. How's the IPA there, JT?
Yeah, this is awesome. The Noon Whistle, it's fantastic, but I'm down at the bottom and I just can't get to my fridge.
I know the feeling. We'll wrap up shortly and let you get over to the fridge.
No.
Andrew says the realm of the possible. The perfect way to put it. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. So you've talked about sort of you're going to try and write something that's a bit lighter, a bit less sort of technical than the things that you've written previously. Does that mean it's the end for Sean Havens, or can you see him coming back perhaps in a cameo role in one of these other books, or would you attempt to put him in a would you go back to that sort of world at some stage?
I still feel like the world that I write in is this world that I constructed, and I even if you look at it from the standpoint of like Game of Thrones, and you're in this kind of place and you're in that place, you may not know what's going on. I still think that even what I'm doing now, I may still slip in some cameos of things here and there, even if it's just some reference. But I have an idea for how I want to continue that series, and so I just have to get through a couple little pet projects that I want to do, let things calm down, and if I'm able to craft these other ones in such a way that I do not have the mention of the DoD elements, the intelligence community elements of it, but yet everybody kind of knows because they've already read the other books, I think that I will feel a lot more comfortable publishing them, maybe even change the series that we, name and go into. But I think the characters will still be there. I think they're rich. I think they're authentic characters. Yes. I think they're very unique. And when I wrote Presidential Retreat, it wasn't a priority of mine. I had written the two of them, the first ones in the first series, and then I wrote this series that I had published, the Task Force Orange ones, and other readers had said, I never knew what happened at the end of 2, and weren't you going to write a third book? And so I had to figure out a way to create that third book that tied them all the books together, but gave my readers back some finality to a couple things. And so I think that's where, look, I'm not making much money off of these things. I'm not a best-selling author, top 5 all the time, and I'm not putting my face all over. So it was just kind of a labor of love, and I think something that I owed the readers. And I think that right now kind of drives me more. I'm in my early 50s. I'm not going to be able to retire. I'm not going to be able to do this on my own to pay for the bills and stuff like that for at least another 7-10 years. So I think I'll continue with these labors of love, keeping Sean and Drake going, into another series. But it's going to be because I enjoy writing it. People are telling me they like to read it. If in 8 years, when maybe I'm a little bit closer to retirement, we'll see if there's some comfort or enough interest where we can say, hey, let's just bang it out, and this is what I'm going to do for you guys all day long.
That is it. And that's the way to do it. I think the moment you stop loving what you do, whether you do this as a job, whether you do this as just your weekend hobby, as soon as you stop actually enjoying the writing process, something's gone, hasn't it? Something's lost. Yeah. And I reckon readers can tell. I reckon readers can pick that up and notice that, that something's not there. In fact, I like to think that whether or not there's some great writers who've been doing it so long and get to the desk and go,
right?
I don't know, but I like to think that readers could tell.
and I think one thing that people don't realize is that us mid-tier writers that aren't in the bestseller range, but yet we've got a strong following and strong readership of stuff. I don't think they realize the commitment that we have to usually have a day job and also write. And then because of the fact that our editors or publishers are not really giving us the top level editors and doing the reading, a lot of us are also having to pay for those services. So for me to even still publish a book, I've got to write it. I do my first proofing. I have to buy the software to do my first run of edits, which can be, a couple $100 a year. And then I'll pay an editor to check the structure, check the story flow. I'll also do the proofing. I may be in already to a good, $1,500, $2,000 before I even submit it to a publisher for potential. And I think a lot of folks don't realize that, because when we're making this, we may only make a few bucks off of some of these books. So you may net $5,000, $4,000 on it, but by the time that you had to put some of your things in, $2,000. My kid makes more than that mowing lawns in the summertime. So
putting papers through the zone,
right?
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. It's a hard. It's not a commercial thing at this level. Not to say that people don't make money from books. There are some people that do, but most of us are sort of struggling from one thing to the next. But love it. Love the process. Oh, JT, it's been fantastic to have this conversation with you. Thanks so much for your time.
I appreciate it.
Where can people find you and your books and all the things that you do?
So
What's the best place?
Probably the best place, jtpattenbooks.com. Is where I post everything that I'm doing, a little bit of bio, links and things like that. I'm on social media. I think pretty much everything that I brand is JT Patten Books. So whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you'll get it. I mean, they're different based on followers. I think on Instagram, you probably just get me with my kids playing soccer, volleyball, or fishing. And Facebook, more of like, hey, this is what I did. This might be interesting to some writers. And then on Instagram or on Twitter, it might be more of like, hey, buy my books.
No, that's great. JT Patten Books then on all platforms.
Pretty
Amazon,
much.
You're on there, aren't you? And those sorts of places too. Amazing. Thank you, JT. Thank you, ladies and gents, for watching this at home. I've massively appreciated it. If you're watching this after the event, still comment to let us know where you are. I still see the comments; they still come up. I really appreciate that. And please make sure you're liking my page, subscribing on YouTube and wherever else, doing all that sort of business, because that is really helpful too. I'm back next week at 5 for more books and beer. I've got David Lyons joining me next week, author of like, what does he call them? Psychological thrillers. Really, really good writer. I'm looking forward to chatting with him. JT, cheers. Thank you so much.
Cheers, Luke, to an empty can.
Yeah.
Good man. Thanks so much for having me.